Mhm.
So again, for us, if we want to take the correct action and to improve the situation, we have to start with definitions. And with these sessions, we always first start with definition. So I would like for you to unpick for us, what does it mean to be healthy on an individual level, and then what does it mean for organization to be considered healthy?
Yeah, well, plain and simply, on an individual level, it's about having the vitality to be able to perform in both your work life and your personal life, because it's all the one. You can't separate those two things. You know, you don't suddenly not become a person when you go to work. That would be very worrying if that was the case. So all of the things that we're talking about there are the things that you measure around fitness, obviously, around sleep, around diet, around safety, psychological safety, all of the rest and recovery and energy management, but also things around social health and the environment and the people around you, whether or not your peers are actually supporting you, whether your manager is supporting you, whether or not you feel you fit into the environment that you're in, whether or not it's an environment that's free from bullying and harassment and the like, but also one where you can actually be mentally sound, where somebody has sat down with you and understood your talents and skills and matches them perfectly with the demands that have been placed on you. Because if you obviously have too many demands, you get overwhelmed and burnt out, as you've talked about. If you've got too few, you get completely bored. So there's an art to this, and that actually is the beauty of a brilliant relationship between you and your leader or manager, that they understand you deeply, but also that you get a sense of the individual and what level of control do they want over their own destiny, over their own life, the level of autonomy, and trying to provide the right level of leadership. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the situational leadership, which is usually, it changes dependent upon the role you have, the task in hand, the experience you have, and all of those factors. So there's an art and a science to this that is really, really important. And it's trying to understand all of those factors that you bring together. And it's really interesting because when we're bringing the data back to the organization, maybe I'll explain what a healthy organization is. It's one that enables its people to actually deliver the results in a sustainable manner. And this is the piece around sustainability, because, fundamentally, I think well-being has a bad name, because, and I hope that's okay to say, but the reality is that in a lot of cases, well-being is done really, really badly. It's like a tick box. It's like events, it's programs. It's completely disconnected from what the organization is actually trying to achieve. And that's really dangerous, because when times go bad, it'll be the first thing to be cut because it's seen as discretionary. Whereas when we see it working in an organization, it's seen as the biggest driver of sustainable high performance. And sustainable high performance isn't just good for the organization, it's good for the individual, because the time you'll feel best about yourself is where you've done a brilliant day's work. And the time, if I take work away from your life, you'll kind of go, what do I do now? Who am I? Because it's an expression of who we are. And it's when all our talents can come together and we can do some brilliant stuff. And obviously what you guys do in the nursing profession is stunning. And, it's absolutely wonderful. So in organizational terms, what we're looking at then is whether or not there's a culture of care, whether there's a well-being culture in the organization, whether or not the leaders are seen as people who actually authentically care for the health and well-being of their people, and whether or not they're role models for healthy behaviors. And when I say role models, I'm not talking about a picture of them on a bike at the weekend cycling 100K or something. I'm talking about how they run the business every single day, how they run the organization. What's the worst behavior that they're willing to accept before they jump in and say, actually, something, you've gone too far. We don't do that here. I don't care how good or how talented you are. You've just crossed the line. And it's really important that people understand that. But there's a range of other things that actually come together to actually sort of say about the learning environment, because change is just, flooding through organizations at the moment. And if people don't believe that they have a good system in place, or that they can change and adapt and grow themselves, they fear change and then they fight change. And if you fear and fight, it becomes disharmony, is a nice way of putting it. Alternatively, it becomes conflict. And when you have a breakdown in the relationships in an organization between the leadership and the individuals, that's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare for everybody. So relationships, if your relationships are broken, as you all know, you're pretty well broken as an individual. So equipping people with the skills to make sure that they can manage those relationships. And by the way, I think, the world has become a lot more diverse. The workplace has become a lot more diverse, which is fantastic. But it's not full of everybody who sees the world the exact same way you do. So therefore, the skills that are required to be inclusive in that kind of environment are different than they used to be. So people have to upskill in those areas. So we're providing, data on both sides to the organization, on the organization itself and on the individuals. And it's really interesting because the leaders of organizations will turn around to us and say, I get it. The organization stuff around culture, around behaviors, around practices, around leadership, I get it. That's all me and us. That's our responsibility. But this stuff over here about the individual and like their finances, their relationships, their sleep, their, and that's not my responsibility. And you're absolutely right. It's not your responsibility, but it should be your concern, because these are the people who are turning up and you're expecting them to perform. Yes. So you need to support them. And the reality is the workplace is a really stressful environment. Just life is stressful right now, right? But stress is okay to a point. It hopefully can be a driver of performance. But the question is, can you mitigate the stresses and the demands in a way that actually supports people where they need support most? And I suppose one of the things I came across, an engineering professor in the States, and he was actually teaching his students to build model bridges. And one of the things that he was doing with these model bridges was he wanted to test the load-bearing capacity of the model bridges. And I was there and I was going, I have to use this because this is perfect. This is like a demonstration of what an organization is. And the question I always ask now leaders is, what is the load-bearing capacity of your organization? And they're going, what do you mean? And I say, well, there's stresses and there's strains, there's tensions and there's pressures. The question is, if you start putting, and in this video, he actually puts weights on the bridge. Now, if the weights are nicely distributed across that structure, there's some hope. But generally what happens is you put a lot of weight in one particular place and the pressure grows and then it collapses. Mm-hmm. And then it's too late. So what we're saying is you need the information. So on bridges, they have these sensors which tell you about the strain and the pressures and the tensions. You need that in an organizational format so that you can actually spot when there's a problem arising, so that you can jump in and put the supports underneath where people need them so that you mitigate this. So this is about doing it absolutely in the moment. This isn't about sort of, doing a nice practice around well-being because you saw something on LinkedIn. This is about saying, what's going on with your people right now? What are the biggest issues on that team, that department, that division, that whatever? And you jump in and help them and fix it as best you can. But that's the reality. So we've got to get much, much better at managing the moment, because this is moment to moment, it changes. And you guys know this, like this is the environment we're in. But what may not have been a problem yesterday is a problem today. It could be resolved tomorrow if we fix it the right way. But this is all about risk management. And you only do this by having data and evidence so that you can focus in all of your resources where they're needed most. But what we find is that with most organizations, they're kind of putting sort of resources into well-being initiatives just to look good on Instagram. Yeah. And they're having absolutely no effect in terms of the performance of the organization. So we really do need to completely rethink how we're running organizations. And particularly if you have a people-dependent organization in a